Hi, I'm Lisa with OESD and welcome. Today we are going to be making the Dona Gelsinger tiled stocking, the poinsettia in particular, and that is Design Collection 80380, and it is the one featuring the beautiful poinsettias, and I actually think I have it hanging behind me over my shoulder. It is a beautiful stocking and would look so great on any mantelpiece, or if you're like me and don't actually have a fireplace at home, hung out throughout your house. I love them so much. They're so pretty. So I'm going to go ahead and start with all the things that I need to get started. The first thing I'm going to make sure I've done already, which I did do, is print out the instructions, because without instructions I will have no idea what I'm doing. I also printed out the thread guide for each tile. I know that I need fusible woven. I'm going to need fusion fleece, heavyweight, fusion seal. I need button clips. I need my tearaway tape, my point and press tool. I also need my fabric. I need about 1.5 yards for the top and about a 1/2 yard for the back and lining part. I have all of that sort of assembled here. I've pre-cut what I can just so that you're not here forever watching me sew these stockings together. So all of this information just happens to be, you don't have to memorize or write it down, but if I go to my instructions, I notice that it's all right there for me, including what threads I'm going to need, which I went ahead and collected here in my little snappy stacker. So I have my threads, I have my tools, my stabilizers, my fabric. I think I'm ready to go, but I need to clean up this mess first. So the first thing that I see when I'm reading this is that I am going to apply fusible woven to the back of my background fabric. And when I'm cutting my background fabric to go into the hoop, I am going to cut generally 2 inches plus the size of the hoop. So in this case, the hoop that I'm using, that's roughly about 15 inches. And I am cutting one piece of fabric, and I'm going to cut it from, let me get it out here, from selvage to selvage. I have my fusible woven ready to go here. So here's my fabric that I have cut for my hoop, about 15 inches wide from selvage to selvage. So I really do have like this really long piece. And the reason why I'm doing this is because I'm going to do a process of strip hooping, which actually helps me save on my fusible woven and my fabric. And I'm going to show you that process today. So the very first thing it says on step 1 on page 5 is that I'm going to go ahead and iron the fusible woven onto the back of this fabric. So I'm going to line them up here. I sort of pre-trimmed this to make sure it was the right size. And I'm going to go over to my iron. I have a nice hot iron here. When I'm applying the fusible woven, I want to make sure that I've got the glue side down and I can feel those. The rough side of the fusible woven is the part that will be adhered to the back side of that fabric. All right, once you do that, now you're ready for hooping, and that's part of my favorite part. So now I'm going to put my fabric here, and I'm going to clear my spot because I've got my amazing grippy grid here, which I absolutely love. We are going to be hooping 4 layers. So we are going to be hooping our ultra clean and tear as well as our heavyweight plus the fabric that has the fusible woven on the back. That is 4 layers. And so to make sure that my hoop isn't going to just slide out from underneath me, I'm going to use the grippy grid to help me hoop. Okay, I have my hoop. Now I need my stabilizer. And I actually have 2 pieces here. I have the ultra clean and tear and I have the heavyweight. I went ahead and I prepped them with spray so that they are stuck together. And the reason why I have done this is because You don't want your project to slip and slide in the hoop as it's being embroidered. And the more that we can minimize that, the better off your results will be with your embroidery. So I went ahead and sprayed the 2 layers together, and I sprayed the top of this fabric. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to lay that down here to my right side. And I'm going to take my hoop. I'm going to put it right on top. It's already sticky. The fusible woven's on there. I'm kind of smoothing things out. Now I'm going to take all of this, again that's 4 layers, and now I'm going to bring it over to my grippy grid. I like being in the center, even though it won't particularly matter, but when I'm in the center there, then I know that I'm ready to go. And I'm going to go ahead and put that here. I'm going to make sure that my hoop is loosened as much as it will go, because if we don't have a loosened hoop, it'll be very hard to hoop indeed. All right, so again, taking it over to the hoop. Then, this is why you like the grippy grid, because you don't want it to shoot around. Okay, I've got my hoop in. I think it's really nice and snug, and I am ready to embroider. Oh, but there's one thing going into my instructions that I need to remember. So, when I go over to my instructions right here, and I read through all of my color changes and all of my thread changes, or all my thread and color changes here. The very last one says seam stitch line. That is really important because without that seam stitch line, we're not going to know where to trim and we're not going to know where to sew. So for the majority of the embroidery, we're going to use white bobbin thread made for embroidery till we get to our seam stitch line, and then we're going to switch over to a contrasting color in the bobbin. If I kept white on the back side, I wouldn't be able to see my bobbin thread. So for that seam stitch line, which on tile 1 happens to be number 17, I am going to make sure that I have switched over for that very last one, that seam stitch line, to a contrasting bobbin color. And I probably still have it in the machine. It is, in this case, it is black. And now you're ready to embroider your first tile. I'm going to go ahead and bring this over to the embroidery machine to embroider. But I actually did that part ahead of time. And then we would have this. So I have the first tile hooped. Now I'm ready to go for the second one. You notice I didn't trim my jump stitches. I will go through and do that later. But we are ready to do the next tile. So I'm going to set this over here. Here is my tearaway and my heavyweight. And I know we're going to get some questions. I actually have, when I sprayed these with the 505, I actually have the ultra clean and tear on the bottom and then the heavyweight closest to the fabric. So I need my hoop again. Put that right in the middle. Take my fabric. Go right over next to the next one, smooth it out, take it over to the hoop. Make sure my hoop is nice and loose. All right, and now I'm ready for the next part. So make sure my hoop is lined up properly, my inner ring with my bottom ring. And again, so happy to have this grippy grid so that my hoop isn't sliding around on me as I go through this part of it. Make sure it's nice and snug. We don't want our hoop to pop out in the middle of stitching. That's the worst. I'm going to go ahead and tighten this up. And now I would be able to stitch the next tile. And you just go through until you've stitched all 5 tiles. And I have that for you right here. So I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to turn this over. And I'm going to number them. 1, and I did that inside the tile because sometimes if you do it too far outside of the tile, you might cut it off. So I'm going to do this one really close. 2, 3, 4, and 5. Now I need to go ahead and trim them, and then I'm going to press them. let me show really quick, because I think this is so unwieldy. I'm just going to go ahead and cut this right in between the two. And if I keep going through, then it's a little bit easier. All right. Now, before I go any further, we all know that the Grippy Grid is not a cutting mat. And we've all heard stories of Grippy Grids getting cut, so I'm just going to roll my Grippy Grid up and bring over my cutting mat. Now, I'm going to take this tile right here and this tile right here. So I have number 1 and number 2. I'm going to take my ruler and I'm going to trim them up. Now I went ahead and pre-embroidered these, and I actually used an orange bobbin on this set. Doesn't really matter what color your bobbin is as long as you can see it. So I'm going to take my ruler and I'm going to come over here and line it up so that I have a 1/2 inch seam allowance is what I'm going to be doing. So I'm trimming a 1/2 inch off of that seam stitch line. And I'm so glad that this is a bright orange bobbin. So easy to see. I'm going to do the short ends. I feel like the short ends are usually, they're good to work with first, because then you don't have to worry about the size of your ruler as much. All right. I'm going to clean up my mess here. Now, the important thing next is to give these a really good pressing, because we want them to be nice and flat when we go to sew them together. You know, one of the questions that we get asked is, why are we doing this stocking as a tiled stocking? And it's because there's so many stitches, look at these poinsettias, that if we did not do it as a tiled stocking, you'd get all kinds of warping and wrinkles in your fabric. This, we found, is the best way to have such a dense design on a beautiful stocking, is to do it in tiles. All right, so now I'm going to make sure, I know that I have 1 and 2, so I'm just going to go through and I can either look at the instructions, but I actually have a really nice visual cue on this, which I happen to know that that's the top of the flower and that's the bottom. And if I did it this way, it sure wouldn't look like it was lined up. So I'm going to look at it, looks like it goes like this. Now we are going to sew them together. And what I found for sewing these together is that button clips, I have my button clips right here, work the best. What I found is that these, I don't know if you can see them, have little teeth. And you see those teeth? It is really important when you are putting these together to sew that the tiles aren't going to slip and slide. And if you use other kinds of clips that don't have those teeth, what's going to happen is you could have some shifting when you go to sew your 2 tiles together. I have found that these work the absolute best. All that work of embroidering the tiles, and you just don't want to have to seam rip over and over and over again. So we're going to line them up right the first time. And you kind of do a little visual check that's like, ooh, that looks like that's going to be great. Now when we go to sew, we're going to be sewing and using our seam stitch line as our guide. We want a 1/2 inch seam allowance, unlike in quilting where you do like a 1/4 inch. Nope. For tiling seams, the best is a 1/2 inch seam allowance. And I love that our digitizers have figured that all out for me so that I don't have to know that, or I don't have to figure it out for myself. So I'm going to bring this over to the sewing machine. And I'm going to line this up. What I'm going to do is I'm going to sew just inside the seam stitch line. Okay, so once you've sewn together all the tiles according to the guide, you're going to have something that looks like this. Fantastic. I even see a couple, ooh, see, look at that. I was like, ooh, I missed a stitch. So you'll want to go through, make sure you get everything. Oh, I could be here for days doing that with my eyeballs. They're getting so old. Okay, the next step is once we've done that, we're going to trim it to the right size. So I'm going to take my pencil and I'm going to take my ruler and I'm going to go around the whole edge of this, making sure that I have a 1/2 inch seam allowance. And it looks like I'm totally fine here, but where it's really going to matter is on this curve. So I'm just going to kind of go along, and I'm just going to kind of point as I kind of go around the curve just to make sure. Okay, now as I come around here, I think I'm pretty good. So I could use my rotary cutter, but to be honest, I don't know that I'm that great at using my rotary cutter on curves. So I'm going to use my scissors here. And I'm going to put my glasses back on, and I'm just going to kind of mimic a 1/2 inch away the curve of that toe. I'll say too that this pattern is kind of nice and forgiving. So don't worry about complete perfection on this part. All right, I'm pretty happy with that. Take care of my mess. Okay, let's just recap really quick because I feel like, whew, that's a lot. And we're about halfway done. What have we done so far? Well, we prepped our fabric on the back side with fusible woven, and we ironed that down. Then we hooped it, and we embroidered 5 tiles, making sure at each time that when it comes to the seam stitch line, we changed out our bobbin to a contrasting one. In this case, this bobbin has black thread on it because with the white background, I wanted to make sure that I saw what where my line was, my seam stitch. Without that seam stitch line, it would be impossible for me to do the rest of this. Boy, I think I altered from orange to black quite a bit. But as long, it doesn't matter what color that bobbin thread is on that last one, as long as you can see it. So that is where we are so far, and that's kind of like the halfway point. Now we're going to go through and we're going to do some serious sewing. So I've cleaned my work surface and I am ready to get out the fabric that I'm going to need for the backing. I went ahead and sort of pre-trimmed them ahead of time, and I know that I need 3 pieces, 1 for the back and 2 for the lining, and I have those right here. So the first thing, if I'm following along on page 10 and step 10, is that I'm going to take this with the right side facing up, and I'm going to take a second piece and put that right side together. So here's the back, there's the front, and I'm just going to lay them right on top of each other. And now I'm going to take this one and put it right on top. And this one, so if you're noticing, I have 2 right sides together, then this one I'm placing with the right side facing up. Now I'm going to take my stocking and I'm going to trace the outline using the stocking as a template. And if you notice in the picture on page 10, as well as what I have here, I actually have the wrong side facing up. So it really is right sides together, because the right side of the stocking is facing the right side of the back. I'm going to take my pencil and I'm going to go ahead and just trace the shape. Okay, now I'm going to go ahead and cut those out. Put this guy off to the side. My pencil off to the side. I'm actually going to use my rotary cutter for the straight part, and then I'll use my scissors for the curve. So I'm actually going to kind of move this like this. Because again, I'm not great with using a rotary cutter without a ruler. I'm not going to go all the way. I'll go to about there and then start using the scissors. Just going to clean this up a little bit. All right. So now we have the 2 lining pieces and the backing. And now I'm going to look, and it says, using the back stocking piece as the template, so this is my back, and I know that these are the 2 linings, so let me put my lining over here. Using this, I'm going to use it as a template to cut out my fusion fleece to fit. So I need to find my fusion fleece. Now, the important thing is this is going to fit onto the back of this, which means that's the right side, that's the back side. If I look at my fusion fleece, I can see sort of like a shimmery side. That's the glue. So the glue is going to go to the back side, which means I'm going to take it and just put it right on top of there, but that doesn't seem right, does it? Because I'm going to iron it and I'm going to write on the glue. Yeah, I'm going to do that. I sure am. So I'm going to take my pencil. I'm going to trace along. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and cut that out. Hopefully my iron is still on over there. I might want to have to double check that there in a second. All right, we've cut it out. Remember, there's the glue side. There's our backing. I'm going to go over with this lined up and give it a good press. And I still got my steam. And it is okay to use the steam on the fuse and fleece. All right, give it a good press. All right, there is our backing piece and it is ready to go. All right, now I'm going to set this aside. So I have my two lining pieces, I have my top, I have my back, but we have more to do. And that is, I'm going to take one of the scraps that I've cut out here. And the next thing we're going to work on is actually the hanging loop for the stocking. I took that scrap and I actually trimmed it down to the proper size, which is 3 inches on the short side by 8 inches on the long side. And we're going to take this piece over to the iron and we're going to make our little loop. And I did that ahead of time right here. So now we're going to take this. It's been stitched on both sides. Tried to stay about 1/8 of an inch in. And I'm going to take this rough edge and that rough edge, and they are going to come over, meet each other, and I'm going to give this another press. All right. That's not going anywhere. So now I'm going to come over here, and I have my loop right here, and I have folded it in half, and if I look at step 16, I'm going to just take a button clip, and I'm going to just attach it where those two rough edges are. Now, set that aside over here, move my tools out of the way. I'm going to look at page 13 and step 17, which says to place the two raw short ends of the upper edge of the back stocking, okay, and align the, place the two raw short ends of along the upper edge of the back stocking piece. So we have the lining of the back piece, or the inside lining part, and we have the actual back piece with the fuse and fleece on the back. And now I'm going to take my loop and align the right side of the hanging loop 1 inch from the left edge, and for me in this case that's right here. Use an OESD button clip to hold it in place. I'm going to put that right, what did you say, 1 inch? So I have this handy dandy marker that's about 1 inch in. I'm going to put that right there. All right, so now we've sewn our loop onto our back, and we are going to be adding our linings. Now bear with me because this is a little bit of like mirror imaging. You know, if you have problems like I do with spatial relationships, I'm going to try and take this nice and slow because I know for me, this can be really confusing. So I have my back with my loop and I have my front. And ideally, what I'm going to try to do with my lining pieces when I go to sew them together is that right sides together, this would actually be with that backing. So what it actually needs to happen is that I'm going to sew this part with 1/4 of an inch to that, and I have them right sides together. That way, this raw edge is going to be encased. So that means I'm going to flip this guy over. You see the right sides together. I'm going to sew this now with the 1/2 inch seam allowance across the top of this and across the top of that. And what's going to happen is it's actually going to encase that raw edge right there. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. Now, before I keep going, I'm just going to peek here and show you that I have the loop for our stocking tucked in here. So I'm going to go right over the loop right there with our two backing pieces. Now, if I've done it right, when I open this up and I go to iron it, I will have enclosed the top. So that's great. That is good. We've done that part. Let me just make sure I did this part correct. Yep, great. So I'm going to go ahead and just press my seams really quick because we should always do that. So I've finished pressing open my seams. Now I just want to check in with my instructions because without them, I wouldn't get very far. So the next thing is, it says, we're on step 19. We've pressed both of our seam allowances open. Now we're going to place them right sides together, the whole kit and caboodle. So here's my one right side. Here's my other right side. There's the front tiling seam. Here's the back with our fusible woven and our two lining pieces. And now I'm going to line them up. Believe it or not, we are near the end. Perfect. Okay, now I'm going to take these button clips, and I'm actually going to take a lot more. So give me 1 second while I find the rest of my button clips. Oh, I knew I had them nearby. Great. All right, now we have to turn our stocking inside out. So we need to leave a little bit of a gap so that we can do that. So what I'm going to do is I am going to mark on my lining piece, and I'm just looking at step 20 on page 14. So I need to make sure that I have a gap so I can sew all the way along, but I need to have a good size gap for pulling that stocking inside out. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to take my little mechanical pencil so that I have an eye visual of where to start and where to stop. And then I'm going to use button clips all the way around. And the first place that I'm going to button clip for me, so I know what I'm doing, is I'm going to make sure that I have the top with the top. I mean, it looks like it, but I'm just going to double check. Yeah, I got seam and seam, so I'm going to clip right here for sure. I don't want that traveling. That's pretty good, I think. Okay, I have it all button clipped, ready to go. I have my two pencil marks, so I know that I'm starting here and stopping here. So I'm going to take this over to the machine and let loose. There's no prize for being the first to finish, so take your time and enjoy the process. Woo! Make sure I'm sewn all the way around and we're not going to have any holes in our toes because nobody wants to have a hole in their stocking. And now I am going to clip my curves so that it will lay nice and flat. And I'm just going to do like, not a ton of places, but just where you have some curves, just to kind of help it. And I don't want to cut the actual seam. Okay. Whew. Now find our hole for turning it right side out. Doesn't feel like it will go with all that stabilizer, but it really, really will. All right, so now we've got it right side out, but I'm going to take my perfect press tool right here, and I'm just going to go back into the hole, and I'm going to make sure I'm pressing right along all of the seams, and popping everything out. I'm going to actually take this whole thing over to the iron for one more press. We are almost done. Can you even believe it? Turn this on the other side. Now we have one more thing to do before we stuff this right back in. And that is, we have this raw edge right here. And so what I'm actually going to do is kind of pre-fold it like this. There's a little fraying going on, but that's all right because I'm going to fold that inside. I'm just going to fold that like that, and I gave it an iron. Now I still need to seal it up, and I have a tiny little piece of Fusion Seal that I'm going to measure my opening 1, 2, 3.5 inches long. Cut that. I'm going to take this piece of Fusion Seal and put it right inside there. Take it over to my iron. It is paperback, so it's actually like it's like a membrane, and one side is fusible, so I'm just going to use the iron, tack it right down there. Then it's paper backed, so then I take the paper and peel it right off. the paper goes away. And then I take that other side of the paper, or the fabric, and it's all sealed up when I do this. So now we don't have any unfinished seams. Woohoo! Now, last step is we are going to go ahead and put our lining right inside of our stocking using our perfect point and press tool. Get that lining right in there. And voila. I love it. Look at how beautiful that is. And again, if we had done it as all-in-one hoop, it would have been, you would have needed a large hoop, and not everybody has a large hoop. And the other thing is, we would have had a lot more puckers and wrinkling because of the density of all the flowers, all the stitching. And I love the density because that's what gives us our beautiful shading and our highlight, the elegant look of these poinsettia flowers. I just love them. We have 4 stockings all together. We have the 2 Cynthia Frenette stockings. One is behind me that says Peace on Earth, and we have our other one, which is Merry and Bright. We have our Dona Gelsinger stockings. We have the Santa that is behind me, and of course the poinsettia one that we just made. And we have these wonderful thread chests that you can get depending on the stocking that you are going to be making. And you can get just the thread chest, or we have an amazing bundle that includes the thread and the stabilizers that you need to make it. We have the Ultra Clean and Tear that we use. We have the heavyweight, and then of course our Fuse and Fleece and Fuse and Seal, which is what we use to seal up our stocking. This is such a great project and so fun to make. I really invite you to come on to OESD's The Perfect Stitch and show us what you're making. I would love to see your fabric choices. I like to play it safe and use what they tell me, but I bet some of you are doing some really interesting creative things. I will look forward to seeing what you make on The Perfect Stitch, and I look forward to sewing with you again soon. Again, I'm Lisa with OESD. Thank you and happy stitching.